The whole concept of zero trust is just our principles of least privilege, minimizing access, controlling information. Because what zero trust comes down to is this. You should design and build an environment, a network, a computer, a system at whatever level. So if any entity gets compromised, it can't impact any other entity.
Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO.
Welcome, my friends. You know what time it is. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. E is in the house. Hope you are doing awesome as we finish up the end of the year. You are just crushing your goals. But remember, even if you're not, there's always opportunity to learn. So what I want to talk about in this podcast is I noticed these terms in cybersecurity. We don't really ever invent a lot of new things. All we do is rename old things over and over again. And it's funny, the buzzword a couple years ago, zero trust, right, came up, and then it sort of died down again. And then I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, as I'm doing more panels and discussions and webinars and keynotes, the question of, hey, where does zero trust fit in has been popping up a lot. So I figured I would do a podcast on zero trust, which is really quite simple. The whole concept of zero trust is just our principles of least privilege, minimizing access, controlling information. Because what zero trust comes down to is this. You should design and build an environment, a network, a computer, a system at whatever level. So if any entity gets compromised, it can't impact any other entity. So the idea that we have basically high levels of segmentation at every level, that's really, if you sort of want a basic definition of zero trust, it's sort of ultra segmentation, right? We're segmenting at every level. So this way, if a user clicks on a link and their browser gets compromised, it doesn't compromise any other application on their computer. And then if we go a little broader, if a user's computer gets compromised, it can't go in and cause any damage or make it easier to compromise any other server on the network. And then if a VLAN or segment gets compromised, it doesn't make it any easier to compromise any other segment. So it's really just all about control, isolation, segmentation. And there's a lot of different strategies that I'll go over later on in this podcast of how it works and how it operates. But before I do, I want to just do a little bit of motivation. It's funny because if you go back, I think we're like getting close to episode 200, going for almost 2 years on this podcast, which is just crazy, right? Well, what I love about it is I haven't missed a single week, right? Woo, game on. I love it. But in the beginning, I would always start off with a little motivational piece. And then it's funny, over time, you sometimes listen to voices, listen to people in your life, right? And everyone's like, Eric, it's Life of a CISO. Focus solely on CISO. So I sort of shied away in the last several episodes where it was just all about cybersecurity, all about chief officer, just going all in for 30 minutes. But what I noticed is a lot of people would text me going, hey, Eric, we missed that other piece. Those other little motivational components really helped us and pushed us forward. And what I realized is it absolutely applies to being a CISO. Because here's the reality. You are a world-class CISO. I just want that to sink in for a minute. It's not you could become a world-class CISO in the future. It's not that you desire at some point to be a world-class CISO. or that you want to learn how to be a world-class CISO, but imagine you already are. The question is, you just have to activate that code. You just have to go in and turn on that component, but it's already installed. It's already there. Right? I often use the analogies a lot that our brain and our bodies and everything is like a computer. So think about it like this. When you install a new operating system, there's often software that's there that you might not have turned on, that you might not be running, that you might not activate, but it's there. Right? Have you ever talked to somebody? This happens to me all the time. I don't know how it happened. It just sort of occurred where when I travel now, I basically travel just with my iPad and do most of my work on my iPad. The problem is there's still a couple things that I was born and raised on Windows, right, of like cut and pasting and things like that. And I always will ask people, how do you do that on an iPad? And they show me. Now, let me ask you a question. If I didn't know it was there and I didn't know how to do it, so I wasn't using the feature. So I was doing it an inefficient way. I wasn't taking full advantage of the software on the computer. But question, was the software there? Was it available? Was it technically on the system? Yes, I just didn't use it. I just didn't tap in to its full potential. And that's where many of us are. Many of us, we have the capability. We are truly capable of not only being a CISO, I'm just going all out on you today. I'm not even saying a CISO, I'm saying world class. That world class is in you. The question is, when are you going to activate it? When are you going to believe it? And when are you going to start using that feature? And I love describing it that way because it's a completely different perspective. If you're going about thinking that I need to become this person and you need to learn these things, you're going to approach it quite differently than if it's there already. You just have to activate it. You just have to activate it. One of the stories I love is the Statue of David. Right? When Michelangelo was doing the Statue of David, everyone asked him, they said, how did you do that? Like, how did you take this big piece of marble and just go in and miraculously create David out of it? And he looked at me and goes, what are you talking about? I didn't create anything. The statue of David was in that marble all the time. I didn't create it. All I did was remove the excess pieces so you could see it. Whoa, right? Tell me that is not like so super cool, right? And that is a great analogy of people's lives. So the way I look at it is the world-class CISO or anything you want to become is within you. What's the problem? Over the course of your life, everybody went in and put all these limiting beliefs, right? All these different limiting beliefs on you. All this excess marble. So now, when you're sitting there and you're like, can I really do this? Am I really capable of it? All that excess marble, you have this big block of marble, and all that excess pieces are talking to you. Well, my 10th grade teacher said I really wasn't good in math, so maybe I'm not here. And my college professor, when I took the business course, said I'm not really good at business and I should stick to technical. And all these things start coming up, and you start forgetting who you are. You start forgetting what's inside you. So I joke, one of my roles is not to go in and create anything. It's to remind you who you are, right? Don't let those limiting beliefs hold you back, right? Don't let other people's stories limit or control. one of the favorite things I hear all the time is I love reading and I love listening to different motivational pieces. And one thing I read recently is the quickest and fastest way to kill a dream is to tell everyone around you about it. And at first when I read it, I'm like, that's sort of weird. Because you think the people around you, especially your inner circle, right? Your parents, your friends, your family members, right? You would think that those are the ones that you could tell those dreams to, right? Those are the ones that would encourage and support you. But here's the reality. Most of them want to protect you. Most of them want to keep you safe. So when you go in, and this was a challenge with me, my parents, awesome people, but they're like, Eric, you're doing so well, right? You're making more than we've ever made. Just relax, just chill out. You don't need to push it harder. You don't need to start your company. You don't need to do all these things, because they wanted to protect me. They wanted to keep me safe. The reality is they didn't understand my dream, right? Because it wasn't theirs. It was mine. So what I quickly learned is, yes, I talk to my parents, friends, and family. It's great. But those really big dreams, I don't tell a lot of people, right? Because most of them aren't going to understand, and they're going to try to kill it. But the reality is, it doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't matter whether they believe in you or not. The only thing that matters is, do you believe in yourself? You need to be your biggest fan. You need to go ride or die with you. I know I see this a lot now with couples, right? He or she is my ride or die, right? But basically, I'm with it, I'm in it to the end. But the reality is, many people don't go ride or die with themselves. They are their biggest critic, and they go in and criticize themselves. So just be very aware these next couple of weeks of your self-talk. Be very aware of the things that you say. Because I know, and I used to do this a lot, right? Kidding around. I would go, when I was in meetings, I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely not the smartest person in this room. Right? Yeah, I tell you, I'm the first one to admit I screw things up all the time. And I finally realized, I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You're your own worst critic. Because guess what? Words are power, and words program. So if you go in and you say, I make mistakes all the time, what does your mind say? Cool. Your wish is my command. And you start making a lot more mistakes. Or if you go in and say you're not the smartest person in the room. So you got to be very careful. We often have just built these bad habits where we say things, or we talk down about ourselves, or we stop believing in ourselves. And the reality is, this single most important factor in people's success is whether they believe in themselves. People that are successful, wildly successful, have one trait in common. They believe they can do it. And people that aren't successful have the same exact trait. They believe they couldn't do it. One of my favorite quotes, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right. Because you need to control your thoughts. And I'll just leave you with one final thought. One final thought. A good friend of mine I met at the gym, I saw him writing this in his notebook one day when we were in the sauna and talking. It's a very powerful statement. So as we grow up and as we get older, we stopped believing in the Easter Bunny and we stopped believing in the Tooth Fairy. But why and when did we stop believing in ourselves? Believe in yourselves, my friend, because you can do anything, because you are a world-class CISO. All you need to do is remove those excess limiting beliefs. So now let's go and jump in to zero trust. Zero trust to me is one of the best, most foundational concepts in cybersecurity. People always ask me about it. I'm like, it's spot on. But the reality is, it's not new. How we designed and built networks in the 90s and early 2000 was all zero trust. We just didn't have a word for it, right? So I'm great with the term zero trust. I'm cool if we want to give it a new name, but it's not anything new. The idea of zero trust is this: 100% security doesn't exist. Well, if you've heard my webcast, you know where I'm going with this. Any system that has any value in any way, shape, or form isn't going to be 100% secure. It's really that simple. Because, yes, 100% security exists with zero functionality. So, yeah, if we take a system and we destroy it, burn it, put it in the ground, and fill it with cement, we could probably agree that it's 100% secure. But it has zero value. It has zero benefit. So as soon as we add any functionality, there's going to be vulnerabilities, there's going to be risk. And that's where we come up with our law of cybersecurity. Just like the law of gravity, always at play, always working, always there. And the law of cybersecurity is quite simple. When you add functionality, you decrease security. Or an alternative method of the law is when you add functionality, you increase risk. But the reality is, any system that has functionality is going to have risks and therefore can be compromised. So if we base that premise that when we're making business decisions aren't yes or no. I always love when people meet me for the first time and they go, Eric, what do you do? Cybersecurity. Oh, you're the guy that's going to tell us no. You're the one that's going to say we can't do it. And very often when I come in to an organization and I sit on a board or I present to the board, they're all like, great. Tell us everything we're doing wrong. Tell us how we're vulnerable. I'm like, that's not the game. The game is quite simply this. What is the value and benefit you're getting? What is the risk and exposure? And is the value or benefit worth the risk? That's it. If you sit there and go, Eric, I understand there's a huge risk here. I understand this is a big exposure. But the benefit is so worth it, we're willing to take that risk. I'm going to be like, game on, right? That's perfectly okay as long as you're understanding and accepting it fully. Now, I'm not saying this blindness, oh, accept any risk, I don't care. No. But with knowledge and information, if you fully accept it, then that's okay. But the reality is back to our fundamental principle. Any system, any component, any device is going to have vulnerabilities and is going to have the potential to be compromised. So with that backdrop, in walks Zero Trust. So Zero Trust says, great. If any entity or any component can and potentially will be compromised, then let's design a network so that when it happens, we're containing and controlling the damage. We're minimizing exposure. That's the whole premise of Zero Trust. Recognizing we are going to get compromised. Recognizing the reality that breaches happen to good companies. It's this whole idea of embrace the breach. And that's another important concept. Most cybersecurity people get themselves into so much trouble because they don't embrace the truth. You need to sit in front of your executives. You need to sit in front of the board of directors, the CEO, the COO, and the CFO, and make it crystal clear. We are going to get compromised. It is going to happen. The only variables that we control is how often and how much damage. Those we can design and build in. But we cannot say we will never, ever have a breach and we will never, ever get compromised. That's the problem. And how do I know it's a problem? Because it's still occurring today. And what I'm referring to is this. What happens when a breach occurs? What is almost a guarantee in all organizations when a breach happens? The CISO gets fired. Now, if the CISO always gets fired when a breach occurs, it's because of a simple problem. The executives thought there was not supposed to be a breach. They thought the metric was if the CISO is doing their job, we will have 0 breaches. And therefore, if we have a breach, the CISO failed and we fire them. Now, if there's a gross negligent issue or other problems, then that's different. But the reality is, these are cases where the CISO did their job. This wasn't gross negligence, and the CISO still gets fired because there's a bad metric. Bad metric. That's another podcast. But the point is, CISOs don't do a good job of being honest, of looking the executives in the eye and saying, we are going to have a breach. Now, I'm going to minimize the frequency and damage, and that's the whole idea of zero trust, but it's going to happen. We have to accept that reality. So with that backdrop, the idea of zero trust is great. How do we design and build an environment, a network, an architecture, so when something gets compromised, we control the damage? So when something gets compromised, it's one system, one server, one component, and it's not the entire network. How do we build and design a system so if a database gets compromised, it's one record, not 100 million records? That's the whole premise and backdrop. Because the reality today, and the fact that it's still true today is scary, because this was something we would address and talk about 20 years ago, is a lot of these networks are still very, very perimeter based. What we mean by that is it has this really strong perimeter, but once you break through that perimeter and you compromise any system on the inside, you can actually navigate very quickly and fast to get access to any data or any information, right? They used to call it the M&M model, right, which is the hard outer shell and the soft center concept behind it. But even today, we see that if somebody's able to compromise an individual client or an individual system within a network, they can basically run rampant. The internal network is wide open. There's no internal firewalls. There's no internal segmentation. There's no internal monitoring, right? There's no internal controls in place. We're just going in and basically saying we're going to prevent somebody from getting in. But if somebody does get in, game over, right? Which brings us to 2 critical principles of zero trust. The first critical principle is we have to control and prevent at every level. So it's not just a perimeter. Every device, every application, every system has to be mini perimeters. So this way, we're preventing at many different layers across the environment. The second one, and this is the one that people forget about. Everyone, when they think zero trust, is like, okay, we design and build, so we have all these little containment, all this ultra micro segmentation, whatever your word you want. So this way, if something gets compromised, it's contained and controlled. Contained and controlled. And that's an important piece. But the part that everyone misses is zero trust is also about mega detection. So when I give presentations on zero trust, I break it into 2 sections: ultra segmentation and mega detection. So yes, I want to do ultra segmentation and isolate, but in cases where that fails, I need to detect that very, very quickly. I need to detect that there's a problem or an issue to be able to remediate it very fast. So let's go in and break down the different layers of zero trust. So starting at a very micro level, very, very micro level, and this is one that not a lot of companies do a good job with, that if they did, would stop a ton of ransomware. And that is zero trust at an application level on a client. So ultra micro level zero trust says this: every laptop, every client, every end device that somebody is using in our organization, if an application gets compromised, it will be contained in that application. It won't impact any other application, and therefore won't impact any other system or any other component across the network. So now, just think of this. If a phishing email comes in and a user clicks on it, with proper zero trust, it's contained to that application. It doesn't get outside that application. It doesn't get outside that system, and it doesn't compromise any other component on the network. Boom! We just stopped ransomware. Wow! Now, yes, there's some technology behind it, but that's really the issue today. Most ransomware is caused because a user gets a phishing attack, they click on it, the application gets compromised, the client gets compromised, the network gets compromised, the server gets compromised, their data gets compromised, their data gets encrypted, and they get a ransom note. That is basically the really fast series of ransomware in a nutshell, which means if we can go down and we could do a better job at zero trust at an application level, then we can contain and minimize that from happening. And there's a solution. There's great solutions out there. One of them is running every application in a separate VLAN. Sorry, in a separate virtual machine. I got the V right? Instead of virtual, I had virtual machine in a virtual machine. So now the idea is our desktops and laptops, they have so much memory. So now when I go in and I run Outlook, or I run Edge, or I run any of my browsers or email clients, transparent to the user. The user has no idea this is happening. It's running in separate virtual machines. So now if they're each a separate virtual machine, now if I click on a link and it gets compromised, my host OS doesn't get compromised. Only my guest OS, and guess what? The only thing running in that guest is my email or my browser. So now a guest OS is compromised, but it's contained and controlled and can't get to any other guests, any other applications, and it cannot get to the host operating system. So now it's contained and controlled, and then when I shut off my computer or I turn off that application, that virtual machine goes away. The malware or malicious code goes away, boom, and tomorrow I have a clean install. So that one solution, it exists. The technology is out there. But this is a great example where we're not focused on the real threats. We're not focused on the real issues. I go into these large companies and they talk about all this complex, they want to spend all this money and dollars and everything on preventing ransomware and everything else. I'm like, it's real simple. Just go and do the micro segmentation with the virtual machines on your host and game over. Because that's how most of it comes in. The problem is we're not letting data drive decisions. I often say one of the biggest problems in cybersecurity, one of the biggest problems in cybersecurity today is we don't let data drive decisions, we let emotions. People get so emotional about new technology and AI and big data and behavioral analytics and all that craziness, when the reality is if we just looked at the data and said 99% of all ransomware is caused by users clicking on links in emails or attachments in emails. And we have two options. One, we can block all attachments and embedded links, which no one's going to do, even though they could. Or we just install our desktops or laptops or endpoints so every application runs in a separate virtual machine. Then, if they click on a link and gets compromised, it's contained and controlled and lasts minutes and hours, not months and years. So that, to me, is one of the number one recommended zero trust. And then, of course, that's the one that's misunderstood and often overlooked. And that's why I spent so much time on it. But then the other zero trust is every computer should be on separate isolated VLANs, right? So if the computer does get compromised, let's say the virtual machine doesn't work and the computer gets compromised, it's still contained and controlled. Internal firewalls. Why do we only have firewalls externally? It's crazy. If you look at the original use of firewalls, they were internal. Firewalls originated in building codes, I believe in Chicago, because what would happen is, I think it was in the 40s or 50s, they started building these townhomes or these row houses where you had 20 or 30 together. And the problem is, if one of them caught on fire, the whole place burned down. So you would now have a fire in one house, but 30 houses would burn down, and the insurance companies weren't liking that. So they put in a building code that said you have to have a firewall, which is basically cement cinder blocks or some other non-burnable material between each of the houses. So now, if one house catches on fire, it's contained. It's contained or controlled. So the idea of a firewall was containing things internally. And then we apply it to cybersecurity, of course, mess it all up. Now don't get me wrong, external firewalls are okay, but the reality is we need to have them internally. High level of segmentation, so if a problem or issue breaks out internally, it's also contained and controlled. And then the other big component of zero trust is we need to monitor and track the data. So this way, if a compromise does happen, we can catch it in a timely manner. And this is the other piece. Most companies focus on inbound prevention. Inbound, let's prevent. But the reality is we can't prevent all things because we can only prevent things that are 100% bad 100% of the time. So if we have something that is bad 80% of the time, we have to allow it in. So the other component is inbound prevention and outbound detection. So I challenge you these next coming weeks, take a look at your environment and see how well are you doing on zero trust. Where can you apply principles of zero trust? And most important, remember the most important fundamental principle. Let data drive decisions, not emotions.